Hello, everyone. My name is Shamsbin Khalder, and my paper today discusses how the Central Sydney independent musicians' online DIY practices allow additional opportunities for practicing independence. What independent music refers to might vary depending on context, but at its core, it signifies an oppositional ethos regarding maintaining distinction in terms of modes, aesthetics, and infrastructures from those of mainstream music, that is, commodified popular music produced by major record labels. So, exactly what mainstream music is may also vary in discourses that distinguish it from the independent or alternative. Rather than assume some kind of fixed boundary between independent forms and those that depend on the mainstream, it is useful to approach independent music as a cultural practice. No such practice can be purely independent, although it might be somewhat independent of some things and more dependent on some conditions than others. The cultural practice of independent music entails different forms of exchanges where actors in a particular geographic location and temporal specific milieu use the economic, cultural, and social resources available to them and on which they are dependent. Practices of independent musicians, therefore, are about practicing independence. My research findings suggest that the Central Sydney independent music phenomena is a socio-cultural formation of like-minded, largely middle-class musicians and enthusiasts involved with independent music, which I identify as a scene. The Central Sydney independent music scene represents a form of independent music within a world where there can be multiple possibilities for what it means and what form it takes. Acknowledging the variability and influences from past Australian popular music legacies, including Oz rock, punk, and post punk roots, my findings reveal that the contemporary Central Sydney independent music scene represents a version of independent music practices. This version is partly characterized by live performances and multiple genre aesthetic experimentation. Live music performances are the major creative outlet for the scene members, although many of them produce recorded music as well. Members of the scene are generally involved with several music genres, including, but not limited to, punk, folk, jazz, reggae, ska, rock, post rock, progressive metal, noise, and psychedelic. Version of independent music practices is embedded with a sense of DIY, do it yourself, and low cost, break even economy that is not about seeking financial profits. This is possible because many of the Central Sydney independent musicians pursue their passion for performing and producing music on the back of financial security. That is, majority of the Central Sydney independent musicians come from middle class socioeconomic backgrounds, and some of them are university educated and or classically trained musicians. They have different avenues to support their livelihoods. They are flexible as they take up different forms of employment, some within the popular music industries and others beyond, to subsidize their music making practices. Instead of generating financial profits from their music making within the scene, they're passionate about exercising some level of control over different aspects of the production, distribution, and promotion of their music, and the gratification of enjoying somewhat aesthetic independence that comes from this control. Being involved with the scene in such ways, the members refer to themselves as independent, primarily because none of them are signed with a major record label, and only some of them are signed with an independent record label. These are some of the characteristics of the Central Sydney independent music scene's version of independent music practices. Online DIY, what is that? So online DIY is simply the integration of digital music, including home recording studio setups with digital audio workstations, and online communication technologies like online messaging services, social media, and producer-oriented platforms with the Central Sydney independent musicians' practices of independence. I argue that such practices enable them to somewhat control how they want to produce, distribute, and promote their music via online platforms such as Bandcamp, YouTube, and Facebook. The Central Sydney independent musicians additional avenues of practicing independence enabled by their online DIY practices is also compatible with the spirit of their version of independent music. This paper is based on data collected in the inner city and inner west areas of Sydney between 2017 and 2019 from semi-structured interviews with 15 individuals of the ages of 18 and above who are involved with the scene, supplemented with ethnographic observation and textual analysis of relevant texts. This combination of strategies of inquiry was conducted to explore and understand the Central Sydney independent musicians' range of practices, values, resources, and experiences, as well as independent music related geographical location and temporal specific institutions and infrastructures. This is a quick overview of the summary of the study participants' demographic information. These are all pseudonyms, and these are their basic demographic information. Just going to keep it up here for a few seconds. All right, so to get a better sense of the online DIY practices of the Central Sydney independent musicians, it is important to briefly touch upon the spirit of their version of independent music, or what I mean by this, their spirit of independent music. Instead of a fully fleshed out DIY, indie, and/or punk-esque ethos, my findings suggest that the Central Sydney independent musicians' practices are informed by their ethical commitments of mutually and often voluntarily supporting each other, egalitarian and all-inclusive community building, and progressive gender and sexual politics. These hallmarks collectively entail the spirit of the Central Sydney independent musicians' version of independent music that characterize the scene. The integration of digital music, including home recording studio setups with digital audio workstations and online communication technologies, including online messaging services, social media, and producer-oriented platforms, with the study participants' practices of independence that are referred to as online DIY practices, is integral to their existence as slashies. Now, what is slashies? This refers to the taking on of multiple roles and self-managing one's music making through numerous DIY activities, like taking up the roles as their own managers and promoters, their desire to maintain a level of control over different aspects of production, distribution, and promotion of their music. Study participant Davis calls this phenomena being a slashy. That is, study participant Molasses, for example, is a multi-instrumentalist slash composer slash booking agent, session musician, etc., etc. You get the idea. As mentioned before, I did not get a sense of a fully fleshed out DIY philosophy related to the online DIY practices of the Central Sydney independent musicians. They implement such practices to take on the roles of being their own manager and promoter, roles that were traditionally the responsibility of professionals within the popular music industry. They also maintain a certain degree of control over their music and such practices when they distribute and promote their music via online platforms that collectively represent sites such as Bandcamp, SoundCloud, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Importantly, I label the Central Sydney independent musicians' digital music and online communication technology enabled independent music practices as online DIY, borrowing from the DIY ethos of Australian punk traditions in the late 1970s, which was one of the precursors of this contemporary independent music scene. Additionally, their online DIY practices are not solely about selling tickets, selling gig tickets, records, and merchandise, and they're also about voluntary and collaborative strands, connoting mutually supportive network community aspects that in part represent the spirit of the Central Sydney independent musicians' version of independent music. I'm not arguing that these practices and platforms are exclusive to independent musicians. I'm only exploring what the Central Sydney independent musicians' online DIY practices are about. and how they provide opportunities for supplemental independent practices. The participants of the study stated that they use similar home recording studio setups and digital audio workstations such as Pro Tools and Logic Pro to record their music instead of professional recording studios. Contemporary musicians around the world and across multiple genres engage with DIY/amateur music production practices that utilize digital recording technologies because they're easily accessible if appropriate investments are made. The finding that most of the participants use home recording studios is suggestive of their economic capital as well as their technical literacies. For example, study participants Adams, McGuire, Raven, Molasses, Bushra, Simpson, and Rice have the financial means to invest in such music recording gear and software. Many of the participants mentioned that their music training or tertiary education or a combination thereof contributed to their acquiring of technical knowledge necessary to operate these home recording studio setups by themselves. Simpson, Bushra, Rice, Payne, and Giovanni shared that once a home recording studio has been set up, the recording costs decrease significantly as compared to the recording via professional studios. They also pointed out that working at home studios allows flexibility in logistics. In other words, their instruments are already organized, they can record music at any time they want, and for as long as they need to. This level of control over the Central Sydney independent musicians' music making and music recording, utilizing home recording studio setups driven by digital audio workstations, that is, online DIY practices as I frame it, is an instance of their practice of independence. Study participants Bushra, McGuire, Raven, Simpson, Adams, and Ryers mentioned that once their master recording is complete and cover image finalized, often designed by themselves while sometimes outsourced to a graphics designer, they make online orders to produce their music in physical formats such as vinyl and CDs from third-party record production companies, and they receive postal delivery of these records once they're ready. They then distribute these physical copies to record shops via mail order and make them available to order via their Bandcamp profile, which is linked to their website and online social media pages like Facebook. They follow a very similar approach as regards to the production and distribution of their merchandise, which usually include posters, stickers, button pins, t-shirts, caps, wristbands, tote bags, etc. For example, the Facebook page of Sydney experimental band Tangents has the Shop Now button, which leads to their Bandcamp page. Besides including free streaming and access to select songs, contact, and booking information for the band, links to their website, and all other online social media profiles, their Bandcamp page is divided into two tabs, music and merchandise. The music tab has links for buying their songs and albums both in different digital formats as well as in physical formats. The merch tab obviously has links for different kinds of merchandise of the band, including limited edition vinyl or CD formats with special record sleeves. Now, most Central Sydney independent musicians, artists, bands, including the participants of the study, have their Facebook page and Bandcamp profile set up in similar ways. They also sell their records and merchandise at live gigs and via mail orders. The study participants agreed that 60% of their music is distributed and sold in the digital format, generally via Bandcamp, with the remaining 40% in physical formats, predominantly as vinyl and some as CDs. These are distributed and sold via Bandcamp and other online platforms, record shops, live gigs, and mail orders. As regards their merchandise, many study participants stated that approximately 60% of sales take place at live gigs and 40% sold via their Bandcamp pages. The study participants preferred utilizing online platforms such as Bandcamp and selling records and merchandise at live gigs because they can retain majority of the proceeds when following these strategies. Bandcamp keeps a small commission of the sales, where live music venues generally do not claim any commissions from the sales of the performing artists' records and merchandise. This kind of control exercised by the Central Sydney independent musicians over different aspects of the production and distribution of their music and merchandise enabled via such online DIY practices is another instance of their practice of independence. Additionally, online DIY practices involving direct booking of live gigs and tours, production via home recording studios, and distribution and promotion via online social media and producer-oriented platforms mean that they can generate nominal revenues to invest back into their music making within the scene and reach break even if possible. Judging from the study participants, their average income from performing live comes to about Australian dollars of 100 to 200 per gig per person in a band, let's say, and their revenues from sales of digital music, records, and merchandise add up to about 50 Australian dollars per month in average. Promotion of the Central Sydney independent musicians' gigs and music primarily take place through online social media platforms, such as a complement to standard offline approaches like posters and flyers. They primarily use Facebook due to its popularity, but some artists, promoters, venues, and gig organizers often use Instagram as well. Fin members promote their gigs and music in different ways via online social media platforms, including through a short message accompanied by a link to the event page, using footage of a previous live performance or low-budget music video, and a plethora of other strategies. For example, see experimental band Emus promoting one of their gigs by simply posting a short message on their Facebook page, and Tangents promoting a gig by posting footage from one of their previous live performances produced by the Sydney-based independent record label and production studio Hospital Hill on their Facebook page. Importantly, promotional work via online social media posts, including live event links, live performance video clips, music videos, and messages, that is, online DIY practices, again, allows in members to have some control over how they're promoted over social media platforms. In conclusion, digital music and online communication technologies facilitate the Central Sydney independent musicians' online DIY practices, which complement offline strategies while enabling multiple online possibilities. Their online DIY practices provide cheaper and more logistically flexible ways to record their music by utilizing home recording studio setups driven by digital audio workstations, and allow them to exercise a certain degree of control over different aspects of the production and distribution of their music and merchandise by ordering physical formats of their music and different types of merchandise directly from merchants and factories, and selling and distributing them via online social media and producer-oriented platforms. Excuse me. Additionally, such practices allow them to have some control over how they promote themselves via online social media posts, using live event links, live performance video clips, music videos, and free streaming of their music. I frame these instances of exercising a level of control over different aspects of the Central Sydney independent musicians' music performance, production, distribution, and promotion as practices of independence. That is how the Central Sydney independent musicians' online DIY practices provide supplemental opportunities for practicing independence. It is important to note that their online DIY do not replace the classic functions and infrastructures of established independent music-related institutions like independent record labels, shops, radio stations, street press, promoters, booking agencies, live music venues, as well as different forms of networking within the Central Sydney independent music scene. Even though these technologies may offer supplemental alternative approaches to music production, distribution, and promotion for the Central Sydney independent musicians, independent music-related institutions and infrastructures continue to exist within the scene. Furthermore, the voluntary gifting of live performance clips and music videos and streaming on online platforms, and the gratification from practicing aesthetic independence by being able to control some aspects of music production, distribution, and promotion, suggests that the Central Sydney independent musicians' online DIY practices are compatible as well with the spirit of their version of independent music. Thank you so much for listening.